In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at a new Exclusivo edition from Siempre. It is the Siempre Muerto edition, right here on the Tequila Hombre. Coming up next. Hello, welcome to this episode of the Tequila Hombre, where today we're going to be taking a look at and doing a tasting review of the new Siempre Tequila Exclusivo Muerto edition at 54.5% ABV, which is right up at the limit of the 110 proof 55% that you're allowed to do for tequila. So today we're going to talk about what makes this special. All right, just as a disclaimer as well, this bottle was provided by the brand for an honest, unbiased review, and it's exactly what they're going to get. I don't get paid for reviews, and I believe in disclosing information and giving the consumers knowledge. So we're going to do a little knowledge dump for you today and give you a little education on fermentation and in the making of this tequila. Now, as many of you know that have been following me for a while, I have an interest in fermentation and actual tequila production. Actually worked on producing batches of tequila with producers. I have a background in fermentation and a lot of experience working with fermentation and yeast. And I've recently embarked, if you're a member of or subscribe to the Tequila, the Hombre Cave channel on YouTube, I'll put a link in the description. You can actually follow my winemaking adventures where I've set up a winery in my garage with a lab where I do analysis. I do all kinds of different things. And the reason why I set this up is because it's for you, those of you that don't know, tequila originally was called vino de mezcal, wine of the mezcal. And in production of tequila and wine are very, very similar. Some of the similarities are the must in wine, which is called mosto in tequila production. It's basically mosto is Spanish for must. It's 80% fructose, 20% glucose, which is the same with tequila production. A lot of the yeast that they use are wine yeasts or wild yeast, which winemakers will use the wild yeast that are on the grapes when they produce wine. And a lot of the principles behind the fermentation in the creation of the tequila spirit and wine are the same. The only difference is with tequila, they do a distillation. So we're going to talk a little bit about fermentation principles and yeast to give you a little background on what's being claimed with this tequila. All right, so get out your pen and paper, get out your notebooks, because we're going to drop a little knowledge on you. For those of you that don't know, I have an interest in fermentation. Those of you that don't follow me, I have an interest in fermentation, been working with fermentation as a national champion home brewer, but I've also gotten into making wine recently. And the reason why I did that is because wine production and tequila production are identical all the way up to fermentation, except for the different types of fruit you use. Instead of using agave and having to cook it, use grapes. But the must for wine and the mosto for grapes, the makeup is basically identical, 80% fructose, 20% glucose. And the yeast that they use a lot in tequila production are wine yeasts. They use champagne yeast, they use other wine yeast as well. So they're pretty interchangeable and they work pretty much the same. So we're going to talk a little bit about fermentation. So for Siempre, they said one of the things they did for this particular tequila is they did 2 batches of tequila. They let one ferment for 28 days and one for 32 days. And they had the fiber, I think, in the 32-day one. But they said because they let it go for so long, it created a more potent tequila. Well, that's not necessarily going to be true because the length of time has nothing to do with how potent or not potent a tequila mosto is going to be. It actually has to do with the sugar content. So the more sugar content you have, the more bricks, the higher your bricks level, the more potent your must or mosto is going to be. So for example, in winemaking, when when we check our grapes, we check the bricks, and we're looking for somewhere around, I normally look for 24 bricks. That'll put me at, 13.8 to 14% alcohol, depending on how dry it ferments. Same with tequila production. Once the yeast eats all the sugars and stuff, and they get it as dry as they can, then it's ready to be distilled, and they can extract all the alcohol out of the what they call dead mosto. And it's called dead mosto because there's no more sugars left. The yeast's finished, and basically the yeast goes to sleep. So what they talk about is that they have dead yeast in their mosto, and that's why it's called muerto. When the reality is there's some dead yeast, because yeast does die during fermentation, and typically when yeast dies during fermentation, it's used as food by other yeast. But in instances where the fermentation is complete, what happens with wine as well as with tequila is if you let it go longer than 5-10 days, depending on whatever temperature it's fermenting at, the higher the temperature, the lower fermentation time you need, because the yeast will go through the sugars quicker. A different fermentation happens, and a bacterial fermentation happens. It's called malolactic fermentation. And what happens in malolactic fermentation is bacteria will start eating the malic acid in the mosto and converting it to lactic acid. So if you've ever noticed some of those tequilas, they have kind of a cheesy note or a buttery note to them. That's due to letting it go to malolactic fermentation. But what happens during malolactic fermentation is the dead yeast is also used by food, or used as food for the malolactic culture. Malolactic bacteria will actually eat dead yeast and use it as food in order to convert the malic acid to lactic acid and do the malolactic fermentation. In wine production, with the wines that I've been doing, I mostly been doing red wines. I pitch a malolactic culture into the wine, and actually we'll put nutrients in, which it consists of dead yeast cells. So the malolactic culture has enough food to eat all the malic acid and create the buttery, more rounded mouthfeel and flavor profile that I want from a nice red wine. Well, in tequila production, they normally will go to the still before malolactic fermentation happens. The reason why they do that is because some of the malolactic notes in tequila can be off-putting to people. It's kind of a cheesy, funky note can come from it. If you've tried the Joven that we did with Cascanes, the first Joven, it was a cheese bomb. It was cheesy and funky, had a funky smell to it. That's the byproduct of malolactic fermentation in tequila production. So I'm sure with the 28-day and 32-day fermentation of this, it went to malolactic fermentation and probably did a whopper of a malolactic fermentation on it. And all the bacteria probably devoured all the malic acid and converted it to lactic acid, which isn't a bad thing. And it ate some of the yeast too and used it as food. But some of the yeast actually is alive and asleep at the bottom of the fermenter. And if they were to add more sugar, it probably would come back to life and continue fermenting. For this scenario, they did these two fermentations, one for 28 days, one for 32 days, combined them, distilled, and came up with this product, which I'm sure is going to taste great. We'll see though. But the fact that the yeast were dead really doesn't have anything to do with the flavor profile. What happens when yeast die actually is kind of an interesting thing too. It's called autolysis. Now, when autolysis happens, it can actually produce notes that are kind of off-putting, that are bad. So like in wine production, you want to make sure that autolysis only happens to a certain extent so that no hydrogen sulfide is produced, because hydrogen sulfide can be produced as these yeast cells are breaking down. It typically takes more than 28 days, though, or 32 days for this to happen. But you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because otherwise your must will smell like rotten eggs, and it'll get embedded into your wine or your tequila, and it'll smell like rotten eggs. So hopefully this doesn't smell like rotten eggs, but we'll see when we do the tasting. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the tasting portion. If you have any questions about fermentation, please push your comments below and let me know. I will answer any questions you have. There's a lot to it in the science behind it. Yeast cells are living organisms. But yeast typically, once the sugars are gone, they'll go to sleep. They do die, but chances of all of them being dead in 28 or 32 days is probably slim to none. And the process of this isn't really going to do anything but maybe add some interesting flavor characteristics to it because of what happens during autolysis. All right, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the tasting portion and see what this tequila is all about. All right, so let's open this thing up. I probably should have opened it when I was giving you guys the class on fermentation. It's got a nice little metal on it. Yeah. It says Siempre. Siempre. Let's see if we can get to work here. Yeah. Good. So, and this nice little wrapper and this twine on it. Nice packaging. I'm glad that they sent this to me so I can review it and tell you guys about it. I know they probably didn't want to because I didn't like the first exclusive, but you know, I always claim I'm going to give them honest feedback, and I gave them honest feedback. The first one, they cooked the live yeast in the still, which anytime you do that, the yeast will actually explode and produce off flavors, stuff you don't like. That's why temperature control during fermentation is really important. And I know with Sergio Cruz, when I've asked him before, I'm like, hey, what? I spent a lot of time with Sergio. We talk fermentation and stuff a lot. In distillation, we talk a lot of the sciences behind tequila production a lot. And one of the things that he told me is his favorite temperature to actually ferment at, he thinks he gets the best profiles, is at 50 degrees or 10 Celsius. So that right now, this time of year, December, January, in around us is a perfect time to do fermentation stuff. So for him, because he says he gets the best, and temperature does matter when it comes to wine production. If you watch the my channel, the Hombre Cave channel, you can see some of my wine production videos. I've been posting them there, and I'm going to be doing some other content, interesting content there, getting into more of the science and stuff behind all that stuff. So if you haven't subscribed to that, check it out. It's the Hombre Cave. I'll put a link in the description below. All right, let's get this open. I probably should have let this breathe a little bit just to see, but we'll open it up and we'll talk a little bit before we, there we go. Oops. The cork came out of the top. So I have to glue that back in. All right, I have to glue this. This happens sometimes with some of these caps. The corks come out. You just put a little Gorilla Glue on that. It'll hold it in. So I'll glue it a little later. All right, so we'll put a little bit in the glass, and then we'll talk about the other production aspects of this. So let it breathe a little bit. We'll stir it. Let it get some oxygen into it. Okay, so at 1414, Viva Mexico, Tequila Viva Mexico, which is the name of the distillery. They use their own estate-grown agave, of course. They have brick hornos that they cook the agave in. And then the agave are crushed and run through a roller mill to extract the beautiful sugars from the agave fibers. And then after that, the sugary mosto is then sent into stainless steel vats where it is fermented with Mozart music playing. After fermentation is complete, they then twice distill using copper pot stills. Sergio Cruz is the master tequilero behind it. Guy knows what he's doing, makes fantastic tequila. I know Sergio Vivanco and Sergio Cruz and Cesar Vivanco and all the guys there really well. Been there several times. All right, so now that we've kind of let this breathe a little bit, let's take a look at it in the glass. So looking at it in the glass, it coats the glass beautifully. Look at the legs and tears coming down from it. See, that's going to have a nice viscous mouthfeel to it. Look at that. It's going to be good. Looking at the Blanco tequila, it is crystal clear. Little dashes of silver going through it from the lights. Looks amazing. Nothing wrong yet. On the nose, really nice, rich, cooked agave notes, cinnamon and baking spices. Has an interesting salinity to it, like minerality. Hint of citrus. Smells like rich cooked agave though. Smells really good. All right, so let's see what we get on the flavor profile. Let's let my mouth get used to the 54.5% alcohol by volume first. Forgot to acclimate my mouth to alcohol. Okay, I think we're set, so salud. Coats the mouth beautifully. Really nice, rich cinnamon and baking spices notes coming through. It's got some heat to it, man. This thing's got some heat. Strong, like jalapeno pepper-ish kind of heat to it. Basically lights your mouth up on fire. Has some interesting characteristics to it. For me, it's got like bell pepper, like vegetal notes to it. Get the cooked agave. It's got this vegetal bitterness that comes in on it. Trying to pick out what that note is. It's definitely different. If you like different things, like different flavors, this should be good. It's definitely different. But whether it's actually good or not, it's going to be subjective. I don't mind different things. I love things that are different, but let's explore this a little more. Get the cinnamon and baking spices up front. A vegetalness, bitterness that comes through. Almost like a plastic bag kind of flavor. It's got this really interesting bitterness note. I'm trying to see how what I would describe it as. There's a little bit on the vegetal side, like bell pepper. But then it's got this, well, it could be malolactic stuff. It's got this funkiness to it that's kind of interesting. Vegetal bell pepper, almost maybe jalapeno vegetal note, but it's got this bitterness that's just yeah, these are definitely probably some off flavors from the yeast being in there for too long. And maybe malolactic fermentation happening, a little something else, a little spoilage fermentation happening too from other bacteria getting into the must for 28 to 32 days open. I know sometimes too, if you leave a fiber in too long, it can actually produce terpenes into the mosto as well, which is like one of the main things in turpentine. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the other distilleries don't do it, because if it was good and if it was something they produced good tequila, all of them would be doing it. This is really funky. So if you're into something completely funky and different, then this would be a good thing for you. For me, I'm sorry, Siempre, I'm not a fan. It drinks more like kind of one of those really funky mezcals more than it does a tequila. I like a good mezcal. I like some funky mezcals. But this one's just doesn't sit right for me. I'm not going to bash it. I think some people really like it. Because it's different, especially if you're a mezcal drinker. this is something you may want to explore because it's different, but expect different. Don't expect it to taste like a tequila, and don't share this with somebody that isn't more experienced in the agave spirit kind of world, because they're going to go, what the heck? It's rough. It's got a lot of heat to it. It's got nice agave flavor in the beginning, but then weird, funky notes that come after it, like jalapeno, bell pepper, and then this bitterness that's kind of almost like a plastic bag. I think is the best way that I can describe it. All right, well, there you go. There's my honest review. If you like the information I've given you in this video, make sure you click the thumbs up. I really wanted to try to like this for these guys. I like the guys, but you know, I have to. I got to do honest reviews. And if I tell you guys this stuff's really good, and you taste it, you're gonna come back and go, "What the?" It's really different. It's really different and funky. So just prepare yourself for it if you're gonna try it. It's not bad. It's not horrible. It's just really different than what people expect from tequila. So if you're new to the channel, bienvenido, welcome. If you like honest reviews, you've come to the right place. That's all I do. Honest, unbiased reviews, and give you information that will help you. So when you have more knowledge when going into the stores to select your tequila. So make sure you click the subscribe button right there and the notification bell next to it so you get notified every time I post a new review. And until next time, like I always say, life is too short to drink bad tequila. So is Siempre Exclusivo Muerto a bad tequila? No, it's just really different. So prepare yourself for something that's going to be really different. If you can, try it at a bar or restaurant first to make sure you're going to like it, because you could end up buying this bottle and deciding that you don't like it. And until next time, salute. Bye, guys.